The American legal system is only as healthy as the lawyers and judges who populate it. Yet the system as it's structured places enormous stress on many of them, which not only affects their personal happiness and career satisfaction, but also can diminish the level of service they provide to their clients and the public who depend on them. In 2017, a national task force on lawyer well-being issued a groundbreaking report. The report found that the legal profession was falling short when it comes to lawyer well-being, that too many lawyers experience chronic stress and high rates of depression and substance abuse, and that those conditions could not support a profession dedicated to client service and dependent on public trust. That national task force recommended that the Chief Justices of the 50 states each undertake a review of lawyer well-being in their jurisdictions. In response, the late Chief Justice Ralph Gants of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court convened a steering committee in 2018 to begin that review and make recommendations to the court. He appointed Margot Botsford, a recently retired Associate Justice of the court, to chair the steering committee, and included Boston attorney Denise Murphy, who at the time was vice president of the Massachusetts Bar Association, as one of its members. The work of that steering committee and later work of its successor committee, initially co-chaired by retired Justice Botsford and attorney Murphy, confirmed that an unacceptably high number of Massachusetts lawyers in a variety of practice settings experience debilitating levels of stress from their work, and identified several sources of that stress. The following is my interview of Margot Botsford and Denise Murphy concerning the results of their work and the ongoing work being performed by a number of Massachusetts lawyers in an effort to improve lawyer well-being. I'm Don Frederico, and this is Higher Callings. Margot Botsford and Denise Murphy, welcome to Higher Callings.
Welcome.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
It's great to have you with me. And you both have been doing, as well as other people who are not on the podcast today, have been doing extraordinary work dealing with an important issue that kind of falls below the radar a lot, and that is lawyer well-being. And we're going to get into that in a very deep way. But what I want to do before we start is just have you tell the audience a little bit about yourselves. And Margot, since you were a justice on the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court and Denise and I were not, I'm going to start with you and give you the honors. But just to tee it up a little bit, I know you served many years as a judge in the Massachusetts Superior Court, and then you also had a very lengthy and distinguished career as a justice on the Massachusetts Supreme Court. So do you want to talk a little bit about your background and how your background kind of tied into the whole theme of lawyer well-being?
Sure. So I was a judge on the Superior Court for 18 years, and then on the Supreme Judicial Court for 10. And before that, I had been a little bit in private practice and for longer in the two public agencies, the Attorney General's Office and the Middlesex District Attorney's Office. So then I knew that I wanted to be a judge because I had clerked after law school for a justice on the Supreme Judicial Court. And so I finally applied and I was on the Superior Court. And well-being, I didn't really think about it, but when I was on the SJC in 2017, which is actually when I retired, there was a national report based on surveys of lawyers and law students throughout the country, which showed a higher than average adult population levels of depression, anxiety, substance overuse, abuse, and disorders. And the report included a call to all of the chief justices of state Supreme Courts to undertake to study their own, the level of lawyer well-being or not in their respective states. So having just retired, I was asked by Chief Justice Gants to head up a study committee to do that. And so we formed a study committee, which included Denise, as she was then president of the Mass Bar, and a variety of other people in different types of practices, public, private, and also in-house. And we worked for basically a year, right, Denise? I think it was a year. And then we did this report. And the first recommendation of the report was that the Supreme Judicial Court appoint a permanent standing committee. And so that's what happened.
Yeah, we're going to talk about those committees and those reports. Let me first, though, bring Denise in, too. Denise, thank you, too, for joining us. And you are a partner at Rubin and Rudman in Boston, Boston-based law firm. And you chair the Labor and Employment Department, the practice there. And I think you're also on the firm's executive committee, right?
That's right. That's right.
But you were also, as Margot just said, you were president of the Massachusetts Bar Association at one point, too.
I was. In fact, I was president-elect and president during the onslaught of COVID, which was in and of itself a great opportunity and a great disappointment. I didn't get to do any of the fun stuff, but I got to do a lot of great stuff.
It's interesting because we were just talking about somebody, I won't name the person, but that person too had a presidency interrupted by COVID. So yeah, my heart goes out to you. And as Margot said, you co-chaired what became the Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing in Massachusetts with Margot. I think that was in 2021 or so. But let's go, or 2020, maybe.
2020, yeah, it was the end of 2019, I think. We had our first meeting and only meeting in person in January 2020.
It's amazing how COVID disrupted so many things.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about that a little bit. And so, as you said, Chief Justice Gants, was a Chief Justice of Massachusetts at the time, and the Chief Justices around the country were asked to start taking a look at lawyer well-being in their jurisdictions. So you were asked to chair the steering committee.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that. I mean, when was the steering committee formed? What was its charge? And what work did it do? And Denise, were you part of that steering committee too?
I was an officer of the NBA. I was asked to poll my constituents in the NBA and ask them about the state of their well-being. And I created a task force. And I was so impressed by the level of attention and the amount of work these volunteers did.
Yeah.
In very difficult circumstances. We created a report, and it became part of the steering committee report.
So, Margot, tell us about the formation of the committee and how you pulled the committee together and what the charge was for the people on the steering committee.
Well, the court actually appointed the committee, which I participated in unofficially. But what we tried to do was create a committee that would represent every general type of law practice. And also we had I can't remember the exact number of committee members, but we had somebody from legal services. We had a judge, Justice Wallahojan, on the appeals court. We had a law professor. We had a law student. We had large firm representation. We had small firm representation. And then we also tried to create some geographic diversity. So, for example, one of the solo practitioners who was on the report, now a judge, was from Western Mass, actually Central Mass, but he practiced in Springfield. We had a former, or maybe she was president of the Hampden County Bar Association. We had the person who was in-house counsel to Emerson College. So we really tried to get a very diverse group of people, and an assistant district attorney also. And so each of them, as Denise was saying, each of them, like Denise, formed a task force within their area.
Well, that was one thing that I thought was really striking about the way the committee went about its work, was that you did have it broken out into different workplace environments.
Right.
So law schools as one, I guess being law students maybe was another, but you had large firm private practice, solo and small firm practices. You had people who were criminal defense attorneys or prosecutors. You just had, and you had a judge. So I just thought that was a great way to approach it, because one size doesn't fit all. What causes stress to a lawyer in a big firm is not going to be the same thing that causes stress to a public defender, for example.
Correct.
They might have very different experiences.
Although I will add, sorry, as an aside, at least if the people in the big firm litigate, they all have problems with the courts.
What do you mean by problems, though, with the courts?
With judges, let me say, and with scheduling. I mean, I would say that was a unifying factor for many people.
Right. But if you're in a big firm and you've got maybe a caseload of 20 cases, that's different from being a public defender who's got maybe hundreds of cases.
Correct.
At the same time. So
those stresses are different, but there were a number that were very similar. For example, if they did feel, anyone actually across the board, anyone felt any concern about being perceived as less than competent and an aggressive warrior type attorney, then they wouldn't disclose it. They hid it because they were afraid of the stigma and the ramifications it would have on their practice and on their clients. And that was across the board.
Okay. So there was a lot of overlap, I guess, but there were also distinctions, I imagine, across different groups. So you had, I think my notes say, from having read the report, that there were 16 members from different sectors, and you had, I think, 11 subcommittees, maybe.
Yeah, could be.
And what you identified, and these are all listed in the table of contents of the steering committee's report, but also it's the way the whole report is organized. You identified a number of major issues causing challenges to lawyer well-being, and they include stigma, pace of work, financial pressures, court deadlines and dynamics, alienation alienation often caused by being a minority or being somebody who's in an affinity group or a diverse person in a predominantly white male world, isolation, secondary trauma, and incivility. And I think maybe we can touch briefly on each of those, but those were, I think, the major issues that came out of the report. Along with the report, there's also a memo, Margot, that you wrote to the justices of the Supreme Judicial Court.
Right.
So this is your cover memo. It's dated July 12, 2019. And just to read a couple sentences, it says, "The obvious goal, which we all share, is to help all Massachusetts lawyers attain greater success in achieving a healthy, positive, and productive balance of work, personal life, and health. Working to attain this goal would be of benefit not only to the lawyers themselves, but also to their clients and to the public interest, which the profession at its core seeks to serve." That's a pretty important theme. I mean, this isn't just lawyers looking after lawyers for the lawyer's own sake. This actually addresses an issue that's more fundamental to our entire judicial system, including the people that are served by it. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? What are the interests that you were focused on and concerned about in launching this work?
Well, I think the first, direct point of focus was on the lawyers themselves. But as that sentence or couple of sentences reflects, that's important, obviously, for each individual, himself or herself, but it also is important and essential for the best quality work and the people that depend on that work. And those are clients and the court system, and the public. I mean, I think it was a couple of the members who really felt strongly that we needed to reflect at bottom that this wasn't just about how we make ourselves feel better. It was really how to make the profession better so that it could serve better the goals that it is intended to serve.
Yeah. Denise?
We are a service profession. That is what we do. We serve the public in almost every way you can imagine. We are fundamentally a service organization, and in order to be able to provide those services and to fulfill our ethical obligations to be zealous advocates and advance the interests of our clients, we have to be in the right place to do it, both physically and mentally. And that's I put an equal emphasis on both of them because they're both equally as important.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, when you read about some of the struggles some lawyers have, and unfortunately a larger number of lawyers than we might have guessed, struggles like alcoholism and substance abuse, even some people who, contemplate suicide because of all the stress they're under. Your heart goes out to the lawyers. And of course, as a profession, we should be looking after each other. But the problem of those attorneys reaches much deeper and affects a lot more people than just the attorneys themselves. So
right.
I think that was a really good observation, and I'm glad you had that broad focus. I then want to read and I'm going to let you both talk more. I'm talking way too much. But just to kick it off again, I want to read, we're talking about lawyer well-being, and the question is, how do you define lawyer well-being? I think that's a fundamental starting point. And there's a footnote in the steering committee report. It's footnote 9, and I'll just read it. The steering committee adopted the ABA task force's definition of lawyer well-being, quote, a continuous process whereby lawyers seek to thrive in each of the following areas: emotional health, occupational pursuits, creative or intellectual endeavors, sense of spirituality or greater purpose in life, physical health, and social connections with others. Do you want to say anything about that definition? It's kind of broad. It's a little touchy-feely, but it's important too.
Well, Denise will be much more articulate than I, but I think we had a lot of trouble figuring out what to use as a definition, and this was the default. And so, yes, there are pieces of it that sound fairly highfalutin, but there it was, in a package. We took it.
Denise is smiling. Yeah, Denise, you agree?
Definitely. And as I said earlier, one of the most important things for me at that time was also not forgetting the physical well-being of people, of attorneys who suffered from hypertension, cardiac disease, obesity, morbid obesity, lack of physical well-being, and feeling as if they had no time to take care of their physical self. And if you look at what the BBOs had to deal with when attorneys become ill, especially solo practitioners, or die and have to pick up the pieces of their practice, it was a significant problem. I saw a way to try to work around that by becoming and trying to engage people to becoming more active and healthy services.
And you mentioned BBO, that's the Board of Bar Overseers. Do you want to, just for people who aren't familiar with them, mention what they do and how it factors into all of this?
The Board of Bar Overseers is our ethical watchguard. That's how I would describe it. And we are bound by a code of ethics. And we are bound to be zealous advocates and to fulfill our duties to our clients. But if we're ill and we can't do what we've agreed to do on behalf of our clients, then we're not fulfilling our ethical obligation. And sometimes the Board of Bar Overseers has to step in and take control. And that's not a situation anyone wants to be in, especially for those folks who don't practice in a firm, who can have somebody cover for them, and who are solo practitioners. They were a great area of concern for us all.
Yeah. I listed the various issues that are part of this report, and I'll really leave it to the two of you to decide which of them you want to comment on. But I'll start it off by just saying, the first item on the list was stigma, and it was striking how large a percentage of the lawyers surveyed were afraid to get help when they needed it. If they were under stress, if they were having mental health issues, if they were having substance abuse issues, they were afraid to get help because of the stigma. They didn't want to be stigmatized as that weak lawyer over there who needed help to overcome this problem, because so much emphasis in our profession is projecting strength, projecting confidence, and that would undermine, they thought, what they needed to achieve in order to attract and retain clients and advance in their law firms.
Well, let me just
can
say,
you talk about that a little bit?
Well, let me start by saying you were using the past tense, and yes, that was certainly reflected in the steering committee's report. But that, I'm skipping ahead. But so that report was sent to the SJC in the summer of 2019, and then, as you know, we've had since then a demographic. A report on the demographics and sort of much more detailed information about lawyers currently. And that still remains, that the stigma still remains an enormous issue. It's not like, I'm playing a little, but I'm disputing the past tense because it is very much a current issue that's very large in lawyers.
Oh, absolutely.
Lives.
And I didn't mean to put that in the past tense as if somehow it's gone away or it's been solved. No, I understand. And the report you're referring to is a very recent report by the NORC.
Right.
I don't remember what the acronym stands for.
I don't think it stands for anything. I just think it's NORC at University of Chicago.
Yeah. And they actually did an empirical study, which we can talk about a little more later. But as I read it, to me, it just kind of confirmed what everybody understood to be the case already, but it confirmed it with a lot more data than had been available before.
It was depressing and sort of incredible to me that when we were in the steering committee, and Denise will agree with this, I think, the fact that the Board of Bar Overseers, every lawyer has to register every single year. They had zero demographic information about anybody who's a member of the bar. They had an address. It could be a home address, could be an office, but they didn't know where people practice, what kind of practice they had, nothing, gender, age, anything. And so the study that the NORC study was really one of the recommendations of the steering committee was you need to do a study of the demographics of the bar. And so we did.
What we didn't know and what we only got anecdotally through the steering committee report was a sense that we were in crisis. We knew that from the so-called ABA task force, but it was confirmed, but it was anecdotally. So we didn't know. We knew that we needed to somehow figure out ways to get services to folks who needed it. We didn't know who they were or where they were or what they did. And that's what we needed to glean from the demographics, because our whole goal was to get them services and to provide mechanisms by which they could improve their health. And up until we started the demographics, we had no way to figure out how to do that.
One of the things that really I found tremendously striking was I mentioned stigma, but I also mentioned, I think, that isolation was one of the findings of the steering committee, that a large share of lawyers felt isolated. and that was causing or contributing to their sense of depression and lack of well-being. And that was before the pandemic. That's what amazed me.
Yeah.
I expected to see complaints about isolation post-pandemic, but you were seeing that back in 2018.
Yeah.
Look at the large number of folks who are solo practitioners.
Yeah.
Massachusetts is by far, I think it was about 60%
Yeah.
was solo and small firm practitioners. They are isolated.
I
They
just
don't
have to
have somebody
interrupt.
they can.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to. No, finish.
Go ahead.
But I was just on that point. That fact, that Denise was talking about, that 60%, that blew my mind. I had no idea, absolutely no idea. I mean, when you practice it, I mean, when you're a judge, or even as a practicing lawyer in Boston, which all of us, you are, you don't think of the world as being filled with solo practitioners, but that is so much the majority.
Yeah, I don't know what the data shows. I would expect that the percentage of solo practitioners is much smaller in Boston than it is outside of Boston. And you see that a little bit with, the Boston Bar Association tends to have a lot of sponsors that are large and medium-sized or even small firms. And the Massachusetts Bar Association, which is statewide, probably has more solo practitioners among their members.
It does.
Yeah.
But I don't think the sense of isolation was limited to the solo practitioners.
No, you're absolutely right. It wasn't.
And what was causing it? I mean, for people that were part of a law firm or some other practice environment, what was causing the isolation?
I think it was the stigma, quite frankly. The fact that an attorney couldn't say to either a colleague or an opponent that I need an extension of time because my mother's dying, or I have the flu. They couldn't say that for fear of being perceived as less than a competent attorney. The fact that they felt like that isolated them. And so rather than develop relationships or have a method by which they can communicate how they're feeling safely, they just internalized it because they were afraid of the stigma, and it just made them feel more and more isolated. Even in large firms, they were afraid to say that I just had a heart attack, or I'm going on vacation because I want to spend time with my kids. No one did away messages. More importantly, no one said, I'm feeling alone, isolated, depressed, and I'm really, really feeling strongly that I don't have any self-worth.
Wow. Margot, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think that the study brought this out a little. I don't know. I can't tell you the percentages. But I do think that people in the public sector feel a much greater sense of community with the other people with whom they're working. There's a common mission. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the public sector. That was very palpable, that you had a common goal and a common mission, and that's very good for one's sense of well-being. And I think about private practice, whether it's solos or in a large firm, there is a need to bill, to bring clients in, and I just get the sense, but you were in private practice, and I haven't been there for a very long time, but I just get the sense that one, even in large firms, can feel isolated because there's a pressure about working for billable hours.
Yeah, and that was another issue that was studied, was identified billable hours and the pressure to do that. I guess when I read this and I was reading about isolation and thinking about large firm practice, I was thinking this must be coming from the younger lawyers. This must be coming from young associates who, are trying to find their way, and they just don't feel like they're connecting with the more senior attorneys or whatever. But Denise, you're shaking your head. Yeah, you don't think it was.
I don't think it was. And what surprised me, and I've only been in private practice, I just didn't understand or know about the very large number of private practitioners who work as public defenders, who actually are solo practitioners or in a very, very small group, who work as public defenders who are and were and are constrained by the very strict rules under which they can bill time and get reimbursed. Yet at the same time, instead of receiving all the benefits of, say, the DA's office or the CPCS, they don't have that camaraderie that Margot, to which Margot was referring. They don't have that. They have, since they're solo practitioners, they have to pay their own heat, electricity, research fees, and they are on their own, and yet they're not compensated fairly, in my opinion, and they do God's work.
So let's explore that for a minute. So there's an organization called the Committee for Public Counsel Services, or CPSC, and it is responsible for providing legal counsel for defendants in criminal cases who cannot afford their own lawyers.
Sure.
So far, I've stated that correctly, right?
Yep.
Yes.
And it works in two ways, as I understand it. There are staff attorneys who are employed by CPSC. And you explained this to me the last time we spoke. That group of staff attorneys, they don't make a lot of money, not like they would in private practice, but they do get benefits. They do get health insurance.
They have higher salaries than the assistant district attorneys.
Is that right? Okay. I didn't
And
know.
they get loan forgiveness eligibility.
That's got to be recent.
Which?
That's always been the case?
The loan forgiveness?
Yeah.
However long the loan forgiveness policy has been in place,
Yeah.
those full-time employees of the committee have been eligible.
Okay. So this is why I was saying studying the different workplace environments was a great idea, because somebody like me who's always been in a substantial law firm doesn't understand what it's like to be a lawyer at CPSC. But in addition to having those CPCS, I said it back. So in addition, though, to those employed attorneys at CPCS, there are contract attorneys. And that's what I think, Denise, you're talking about.
They're independent contractors.
They're independent contractors who are technically in private practice, but all their work is really in public defense, getting cases sent to them by CPCS.
Correct.
And the problem is They not only don't get benefits because they're not employees, but the rates they get paid are extremely low. And I was struck by this on page 26 of the steering committee report. It's footnote 54. And I assume this is the same thing, but if what I'm reading is something different, you can correct me. It says, for the criminal trial and appeals units and the youth advocacy division, the hourly rates are $53 for district court, $68 for superior court, and $100 for murder cases. For the child welfare unit, the rates are $53 to $55, except for a temporary increase to $75 in Hampton County in fiscal year 19. Now, this was written again in July of 2019. I don't know how the rates may have changed since then.
I think they've probably gone up a bit, but so is the cost of living.
I mean, there are partners in some of the senior partners in the largest law firms and most successful law firms in Boston are billing well over $1,000 an hour. Probably some that may even approach $2,000 an hour. I don't know. I was never at that level. But $53 an hour, how does somebody live on that?
They don't. They have second jobs. There was a woman who worked as a public defender who also worked at Home Depot designing kitchens.
Wow.
It's phenomenal. And then, it's at every inflection point, whether you're talking about the number of hours they can bill for, the kinds of stuff that they can't bill for, like waiting time, which they have to do at courts, travel time. I mean, there's so many things that, in addition to that incredibly low hourly rate, they can't bill for at all.
It's enough. I mean, it makes you wonder why they don't find something more lucrative to do, but I guess it's just not that easy.
Well, it's not just so much that it's not that easy. These people are dedicated to what they do.
Yeah.
You know, during the worst of COVID, they still went to see their clients. They still went and had in-person meetings with juveniles, or with clients who are going to be who are going to either lose their children or have representing the children who are going to be taken away. These are dedicated souls. They do God's work.
Well, and the people they represent need them, and they need somebody to do that work. But ultimately, I guess those are rates that the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, has decided to pay. And I know there are lobbying efforts frequently, I think. I know that I've certainly been in the room when some were occurring or have been involved in them to try to get a budget sufficient to cover public defense, which I always understood to be money for CPCS, but I don't think I understood until recently how much of that was divided between the full-time CPCS attorneys and the contract attorneys.
Right.
But so I want to come back to it when we talk about what's happening today and what needs to happen. But let me move on just a little bit. So another thing that I found kind of ironic, I suppose, and I'm sure many people can relate to this, even who are not lawyers, is how much technology has added to the stress people feel.
Yeah.
There's a great quote in the report, Margot. Let me find it. It was from a solo practitioner, and I love the way they worded this. I'm just going to read from the report. It says, or as one solo practitioner put it, quote, "You can never unplug." Never is in all caps. "Clients and lawyers expect you to be always on. My office is always in my pocket." I love that quote.
It's Denise got it. It was on Denise's, the people in Denise's subcommittee. Yeah, isn't that beautiful?
It's a great quote, but it's a frightening concept.
It is.
It is.
And I know we all feel that way. You know, we all have our phones with us most places we go, and maybe some people leave them on at night when they're asleep. But what can you tell me about that? How big a problem did you see with technology adding to the stress?
I think enormous for just that point. I mean, that was a commonly shared view, and probably is a commonly shared view. The other aspect about technology, I think, is that for older lawyers, and of course, as we've learned from the demographics, we have a fairly sizable majority of lawyers are old. There's a real knowledge gap about technology and what its benefits are and how to use it, how to access it.
Yeah.
And so, both sides of that are a problem, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. But some of those older lawyers are probably the ones that are buzzing the younger lawyers on their iPhones in the middle of the night and telling them,
well, yeah, in a
firm. The office.
Yeah, no question about that. No question about that.
Yeah.
But one more thing I would add, which I think it's reflected a bit, but Denise will know, is that it's, when you're looking at the number of people, percentage of people in solo and small firms, and I'd say they are the ones who are most affected by this. Yeah.
Especially because their clients have their number.
Oh, yeah.
If their clients are stressing out about their very important cases, they may be contacting their attorneys at all hours of the day.
And think about the probate bar in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah.
One of the things that struck me about that, especially for the solo practitioners, was the older practitioners reported that they felt like they were unable to compete and bring in business with younger attorneys because they weren't as facile with technology. And many of them were just deciding to give up. And, in an odd way, COVID helped with that. Because when COVID happened, resources immediately, our committee immediately, thank you, Heidi Alexander, who is just a wonderful person, immediately went and put on tutorials. I know the MBA did put on tutorials free for not just for members, but tutorials how to access technology.
What a great idea.
Yeah,
Step by step by step. And that really broadened the spectrum for so many folks.
Yeah, that just seems brilliant. I mean, I understand people were learning how to use Zoom, but you went, or Heidi and the MBA went well beyond Zoom.
Yeah, no, we did. I mean, that was one of the first things that the committee, which had then formed, did, was to try to set up. I mean, Heidi is a technological whiz. She's the executive director of the committee, and she really spearheaded it. But it was really to try to make from the committee this resource available for a couple months, I think.
It was throughout the worst of COVID. We were an accessible resource. I was very proud of that.
That's really great. You should be proud of it. So some of the other issues that you identified are issues we've seen before. Billable hours, the pressure to bill hours. It struck me, you made a point of saying, I think, that one law firm, I think it was a big firm, actually increased their billable hour requirements at the same time that there were increased stress being shown all across the board for lawyers. And that's always been an issue, right? And law firms, I know, have struggled with that. I've seen law firms set their billable hours and then set them at a different level. And I think trying to deal with associate and lawyer dissatisfaction. But that pressure still remains. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that.
Well, one of the, I think it was a recommendation of the large firm subcommittee, was to uncouple bonuses from billable hours. I do not think that has happened at all.
Yeah.
And I also think that, I mean, it's easy for me to say, but if it doesn't, we're never going to solve this problem of stress in large firms.
Well, it's unfortunately, private practice is a profit-driven enterprise. And when I think in the 1980s, law firms started caring about how they were being ranked, especially in the category of profits per partner, that really changed the dynamics of practicing law, I think. I go back far enough to remember when that happened, and I've been with law firms that have done a lot of good things, but one thing they also did was they were very focused on that profit per partner number, and they were conforming their behavior to it so that they could go up in the rankings. This is the American Lawyer Rankings, under that category, and attract more lateral partners who would add to the profitability of the firm, people that wanted to be with a firm that was that profitable for every lawyer. And it's kind of a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
They would change categories of partnership so that only the people making the most money would be considered in the category that would be reported to the American lawyer, and therefore the firm would appear to be more profitable than it was. I don't mean to cast aspersions on any particular firm, and I'm not going to identify any of the ones that I think may have engaged in these kinds of practices, because I think they're widespread. But that pressure to bill hours and is all part of the law firm culture of trying to make sure that their profit per partner numbers, if they're a big firm, are high enough that they'll be viewed by clients and by lateral lawyers as very successful and attractive law firms.
course, the downside to that is retention.
Yeah.
Because you can't keep that pace up. And you constantly reinventing and reinvesting in new talent to try to acclimate them to this culture, as opposed to trying to have somewhat of a balance and retain people, because it costs a lot of money to hire and train new attorneys.
And fortunately, that influences law firm management too. I mean, fortunately, law firms, I think good law firms are attuned to that. They also are attuned to the fact that there are many benefits in having strong pro bono programs. And so they're very good at providing pro bono services, and that keeps people happy as well. And maybe they give billable hour credit for some of those pro bono services. So I don't mean to paint too dark a picture, but certainly billable
You can.
hour,
It's okay.
I can't. But certainly billable hour credit is a pressure that almost every lawyer in a big or medium-sized maybe law firm
always
feels. And then talk about old issues. Civility came up. Margot, you're shaking your head, and I know the SJC has tried to deal with civility. I think there are standards. They're not binding rules on civility, but why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I'm shaking my head because I feel that it remains this unsolved, maybe insoluble issue, because I think the connection, which the report, both the steering committee report and the the demographic study recently done, indicate, is that abusive conduct, incivility, is a great cause of stress and unhappiness and interferes with well-being. And I just don't think we have really, we have not figured out how to deal with that in an effective way. One of the things I think a lot of litigators say, and I think they are absolutely right, is that if you really want to deal with incivility, particularly between and among lawyers, or at least those who litigate, is judges have to come down really hard and impose sanctions, monetary sanctions. We've, for a lot of years, have had the discussion in generalities, but I think we've got to figure out a way to make the rubber hit the road, because it's unsupportable just philosophically that you're fighting all the time over stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And it's unsupportable from a health, a mental and physical health perspective as well. It's supposed to be a profession that, has self-respect and respect for others, and this is how you treat people. It makes me go ballistic.
Why have this efforts to steer the profession towards more civil conduct? Why have they been so unsuccessful?
I think in large measure because the judges aren't doing what the bar wants them to do, is to take a stand. It's one thing, you have to remember that in courtroom dynamics especially, there's often a disparity of power. You have a younger, less experienced attorney with an older, more seasoned attorney, and the older, more seasoned attorney speaks in a denigrating way. So in front of the judge, in front of the other their adversaries' clients, in front of juries, and they get away with it. That is unconscionable and should not be tolerated.
I hope it's the exception and not the rule. Many of us older attorneys would not do that.
You'd be surprised.
It happens. Yeah. It does happen, and I'd say younger women particularly get it.
Yeah.
And people of color. If you read the affinity bar reports, which literally brought me to tears, listening, participating in those listening sessions, listening to what attorneys in underrepresented populations endured and endure to this day, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And it happens.
It is. And that may be a good segue to the next thing I was going to ask you, which is part of the report focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that being a real problem. I know in Massachusetts, I think this report points out that we're a predominantly white bar. So it's just not as diverse a population as some other states have. what did you find about that, and what are your observations about the extent of the problem in Massachusetts?
It's enormous. Start. You can generally, I mean, I'm projecting. I don't know this for a fact, but it just seems to me totally reasonable that if you are a law student going to school in this state, in one of the schools, and you are Black or Latinx or whatever, and you graduate and you look around you and you look at the percentage of people who are Black or Latinx, and you think, why would I stay here? Why don't I go to New York or Washington or Atlanta, where, there's people that look like me? So there's a vicious circle part of this as well. And then when you add to that the cost of house, this is a very expensive state to live in. And then you add student debt. There's just a whole lot of reasons that I think conspire with each other to make it difficult to change. One of the things that the steering committee, all the members said that was important to them was trying to increase the diversity of our bar for a variety of reasons. And, what the demographic report shows is that there is a slight increase in lawyers of color younger than older. And that's very encouraging, but it's still very small. We've just got so much work to do and to try to improve life for people who are practicing, who are of color, who are here. Yeah.
And then there's also a gender imbalance, although I think my sense is that we've gotten better about that, but that better balance is all happening right now at the younger levels. It hasn't yet worked its way up to the more senior levels of the profession. Denise, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I still think that we are a large male dominated profession, and that women bear the burden of childcare still disproportionately, and that law firm culture and law practice culture has a implicit bias against partners of both genders or same gender devoting an equal time to childcare. And that somehow men, for example, are penalized or perceived to be less than competent attorneys if they say they want to stay home and do childcare, as opposed to women who it's their job, that's their traditional role. And I think that's still very, very true in Massachusetts.
Those are some of the key issues that I think have been identified. I know there were also financial pressures, court deadlines and dynamics. I know when we talked about isolation, I forgot to mention that you also found judges felt isolated, not just lawyers. Where are we now? I know your steering committee, one of the recommendations was to form a standing committee that would continue to monitor and try to identify ways of addressing some of these issues. And so the standing committee was formed. I think the two of you were co-chairs of that committee.
We were, yes.
Initially. And who are the chairs today?
The co-chairs are Mala Rafiq, who, Mala? Anyway, who's owns a firm that does ERISA work in Boston. There's a small firm. 2 lawyers in Boston. Yeah.
Very good firm.
She doesn't bill, but she does work 100,000 hours a week. I will tell you that. But anyway, so Mala Rafiq and Mary Struther, who's now general counsel of Northeastern.
Oh, great. Okay. So what is happening now? What has been accomplished since the steering committee report? I don't expect a lot of detail because we don't have that kind of time, but in, just broad strokes, how much progress has been made since then and what still needs to be done? And I know the two of you are not on these committees anymore.
Well, yes, we are.
We are.
Right? Oh, you are?
Yeah.
You're members of the committees. Okay.
Yes.
You're not chairing it anymore, but now you're members. Okay. So and I know there's also another organization, Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, that's very much involved in this as well. So where are we today? Have we made any progress, and what more do you hope will be done?
I think that's one of the things LCL, Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. I think one of the greatest accomplishments that we've had since we formed was to strengthen our relationship with LCL, create an opportunity for further Commonwealth-wide growth for their services. We are working in partnership with them to develop programs and provide accessibility throughout the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts and a broad range of services, not just for folks in recovery, but also for people who are in need of mental health support.
I think there are a number of projects, some might think too many, that the committee with Heidi Alexander has started. And I think they're all really exciting. Can I say to you that they could, have a billboard of success yet? No, but they include an online mentoring service, particularly focused on solo and small firm lawyers, which allows you to look at a database of mentors and figure out, if you've got some particular kind of legal problem, or maybe it's not a legal problem. Anyway, connect either once or many times. And that is trying to address the fact that many small and solo practitioners have no mentoring availability.
And is that available for all lawyers in Massachusetts?
Yes.
And let me interrupt you for a second. If somebody who's listening to this podcast wants to learn more about it, where do they go? They
go to this incredibly chock-a-block full website of the lawyers of the Standing Committee for Lawyer Wellbeing, which just has 4 gazillion resources listed on it. In fact, for those of us who aren't too talented, you get lost. I shouldn't say that, but there's a ton of stuff on that.
Good.
So that's one service. There is an ongoing effort to help people manage their student debt and get counseling about how to do that, not to pay. Well, actually, there is an organization that helps pay, but that's something separate. But it's really about trying to manage it. There's a continuing advocacy effort to try to get the lawyers that Denise was talking about, the people that do this representing indigent defendants but aren't full-time employees of CPCS, to be able to get their loans deferred in that same loan forgiveness system. What else do we have, Denise?
The financial counseling, the increasing the breadth of LCL, creating communities among the various areas of our practice for networking and for exchanging of ideas. We have meetings periodically, for example, with executive law office management, so that we can exchange ideas and talk about issues that confront them.
Yeah, one of the things I remember reading was how important it was for change to take place from the top down.
Yeah.
So getting to the law firm managers is an important priority, because without the heads of the law firm supporting the efforts, nothing's going to happen.
Right.
There's also a deeper collaboration with the trial courts and engaging in increasing awareness of the issues, and actually trying to implement programs that increase availability for effective resolution of issues. For example, there's a hotline. If you have a problem with a bullying adversary or a bullying judge, you can call the trial court hotline.
And I'll put a link to some of this information in the show notes for this podcast. Go ahead, Margot.
Well,
you were going to say something.
There's things. This is why it's a work in progress. I wonder how much that's used. I don't know if it's used enough. But another thing that was of concern is the sort of diversity issues and as Denise mentioned, in the summer of 2020 and reaching a little bit farther, we had these town halls with 7 different affinity bar associations: Black Women Lawyers, Mass Black Lawyers Association, Hispanic, Southeast Asian, at a later point, the Disability Committee. And there is a report that reflects what came out of those listening sessions that is arresting in its just what life is like if you are a lawyer trying to practice in this Commonwealth and come from a historically marginalized community. And, so one of the things that came out of that was a set of task forces looking at how lawyers are experiencing in the courts, in public, in a whole lot of settings. And right now, I think starting very soon, there will be an ongoing outreach effort to publish the results of that and try to bring to all these employing communities and courts concrete suggestions about how better to improve the way that each of them responds to and seeks to work with lawyers from historically marginalized communities. So, as I say, that's very much a work in progress. But I think it's something that is important to keep in mind. And I think one of the things that coming up that I think the committee intends on pursuing is having a new set of town halls with affinity bars and others to try to see if we've made any progress, because we don't know.
The other thing I point out is what I think has come out of our work is an increased emphasis to encourage bar associations to have bench bar conferences where very frank discussions take place, and to encourage bar associations to have DEI committees and make them effective DEI committees, and produce programming in a way that is educational, is helpful, and helps folks feel seen and heard. One of the best I attended was a couple of months ago, and it was all about definition of how to help and be an ally to LGBTQ plus folks in court. So when they are marginalized, which often happens, or if they feel as if you don't understand them or you're not welcoming, there are small things that you can do. Which is, I don't know if you saw it when I signed on. I'm Denise Murphy, she, her, hers. I do that for one very good reason. Our fellow said it just makes people feel welcome and feel like they can approach you. And I saw no problem with that whatsoever. What a great thought. Just simply doing something, identifying my gender pronoun. No big deal to me.
And I think LGBTQ plus was also one of the groups that was part of the focus of the work of the Standing Committee.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. I applaud you and everybody else involved, because I know it's not just the two of you, but you two have led the charge for some period of time. And this is such important work. It would be so easy to not do it, just let it go. But that would be the wrong thing to do. You've addressed a very important issue and problem that needs to be addressed. And I think it does sound like progress is being made and will continue to be made. If you had, just as a sort of final note, if you had one message you wanted to get across to people who are listening to this podcast about lawyer well-being, at least in Massachusetts, what would it be? Denise, let's start with you this time.
We're not done. We've got a lot of work to do. We just hit the tip of the iceberg, and it's something that's so critical to every single one of us. We can never give it up.
And Margot?
I think mine would be that this is a wonderful profession, and it is a profession, but you need to participate and join if you really are going to be able to increase at least your emotional and maybe physical and spiritual well-being. It's got to be a community. I just feel like community is just so essential to people's well-being.
I agree. Well, thank you both so much for joining the podcast, and thank you for all the work you've done. It's good to know that there are people out there who are concerned about these types of issues, and that we as a profession and members of the profession can look out for each other, even if it takes years to really make significant changes that will improve the lives of large numbers of people. So thank you, and I appreciate your being on Higher Callings.
Thank you,
Don.
Thank you, Don.
The best part is I get to be friends with Margot.
Yeah, that is the best part. I get to be friends with Denise.
And I get to talk to both of you, so we're all very fortunate.
Yes.
We are. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been an episode of Higher Callings. Your host is Donald Federico. Music is provided by Fancy Mountain, and our logo was designed by Matt Pedro. The associate producer is Brian Federico. Higher Callings is a production of Federico Media, LLC.